I'm not getting older, I'm only getting smarter and wiser and better looking. Oh, look at the gray hair. How's it going, my friends? Welcome back. Put on my hat because I thought it was going to be cold out here, but holy damn, it's actually pretty warm considering the sun is just now setting. I'm sure it'll squirrel fight. I'm sure it'll get cold and no Lucy's going to get the squirrels. So I'm sitting here with a few thoughts on my mind about ancient history, and I decided to come out and share them with you all. And you know, it's a funny topic. I guess it's a very general topic, ancient history. It's something that when I was younger and I was growing up, I remember acquiring a book on archaeology. And this was a series of books that were put out, I think, in the 50s through the 70s. They were the All About book series. Just like encyclopedias, I believe you would get one. For example, might come across as funny to people, but every time you went shopping at the grocery store and spent a certain amount of money, you'd get an encyclopedia. And every time you went, you could get a new encyclopedia, another part of the series. Back in the 70s and 80s, I mean, that was a popular thing because everybody wanted a set of encyclopedias. I mean, of course, then you can look up anything. Oh, if we only knew what we were in for. On that note, I think we were better off with just encyclopedias, but I'll get to that. So, there were also these all about books, all about everything. I remember, all about rocks and minerals, all about gasoline. I mean, you name it, right? I don't remember the specifics except the one book that I had on my shelf until I was like 12 or 13. I don't know what happened to it, but honestly, it might still be around somewhere. It was called All About Archaeology. The other one was chemistry, and I really loved it. They talked about phlogiston, which is what people used to think burned when you light something on fire. phlogiston. You should look it up, it's funny. This idea that everything contained phlogiston, and that's what burned, and how long people believed this until they proved it to be wrong. And the archaeology book, for me, was, in my mind, well, these are people who go out, they educate themselves on, ancient animals, or maybe they're paleontologists, botanists, whatever it might be, and they go out and they do research, and they study that research, they compare it with notes with other people, and then we discover what's true about history. Oh boy, how wrong was I, right? I mean, I really thought that there was a certain amount of prestige and honor within the scientific community, which there is, don't get me wrong. Plenty of totally legitimate scientists out there doing great work, a lot of it recognized. But let's just say, if you really want to be famous and you want to be remembered and have your name on a chemical, your name on a discovery, people are willing to go to great lengths to bullshit and lie about their statistics, their facts, their findings. In fact, the first one that comes to mind is Piltdown Man. Piltdown Man was an ancient, jawbone and tooth fragment that was believed to come from a 500,000-year-old ancestor of mankind. And this was proposed in 1912. It wasn't until the 1950s, it was 41 years later, when it was proven to be a hoax. Now, the whole scientific community was in doubt that whole time, as they should be, if you can't study something and look at it yourself. But it wasn't just a hoax, it was a partial skull of somebody from the medieval period, a jawbone from an orangutan, and teeth from a chimpanzee that had been filed down to look more like human teeth, and then stained the whole skull with a certain color to make it look old, like a fossil. The extent that people will go to lie in order to get their name on something, and the funny thing is, a lot, if you look at the psychology of it, as best we can, externally, I mean, I can't get into somebody else's head, a lot of these people don't even do it for fame. A lot of these people don't do it for money. But it's almost like internet trolls, okay? There's a lot of people who might go out and troll and harass because maybe they get paid to do so. Others do it because maybe they're angry inside and they just want to take it out on others. But there's a certain segment of people who just do it for the entertainment without any malice or intent, just because. And there are, I guess, historical information trolls that do the same thing, just muddy the waters for the sake of muddying the waters. But usually it's prestige. And I'd say 90% of the time, at least, it's just wanting to get noticed. Now, if you may have heard of the Crystal Skulls, for example. Hell, they made an Indiana Jones movie about it. I was fascinated with this idea of ancient technology. There was a quartz skull that was found by a guy and his adopted daughter, and they went out together. She wrote a story about it. After he died, she ended up touring with the skull and letting people see it and touch it, and it was analyzed. It was pure quartz, and they said, it was crazy. How could an ancient person have done this? And people would say, it would have taken like 5 generations of people, some family member always carving on this. Ridiculous. We know that one person's not going to spend 50 years carving something. But so there's always something fishy about these stories. But once it was finally analyzed with modern tools, modern microscopes, then they found modern tool markings in it. That obviously it was made more recently. And most of these, amazing ancient discoveries, these crystal skulls, and many other things have been proven to be hoaxes and forgeries. Now, today we live in a time when it's easier than ever to make a forgery. There's so much information and data and testing you can do on metals and jewels that you could put things up for sale that are worth millions of dollars. Just look at forged paintings and how far they came and the extent people will go when it's money on the line. So what that does, in my mind, is creates an incentive for people to lie. And the worst part about this is that it creates an incentive for people to believe. Now, I'm not talking about items and stuff. I really wanted to talk about this kind of ancient aliens, ancient archaeology BS that goes around and poses as information. These people who say, well, this was built with ancient technology, high technology, it's proven, there's no way around it. Must have been aliens, or we must have had some advanced species of humans, maybe it was the Atlanteans. Then you end up with entire channels like Gaia. No offense if anybody has Gaia out there, but it's a subscription service that basically shows you these kinds of shows. The ones that will tell you why your chakras are out of alignment because of Mercury retrograde, or what you should be doing when Venus is in your house. Not literally, but let's just say I've done my charts, my star charts, okay? I've done my astrological charts. And because people will always mention that, you should do your star charts. Like, no, I've done them, and they tell me what I want to hear, just like if I did any other star chart. Everything within modern astrology, to me, is utter bullshit. Even the ones who claim to have had the most, study and research on the ancient ways, I don't believe it, because there's a missing link. That missing link is how you got to where you're at from the ancient technology. What paper did you see I haven't seen? What book did you read that I didn't read? I've looked. It seems that most of the ancient knowledge is obscured at best, very obscured. What you might call occult. Occult because it's hidden. That's what the word means. And hidden for a reason. Because when Christianity took hold in Europe and the Middle East, they ravaged other belief systems and destroyed their books, destroyed their teachings, burned their temples. The Crusades got out of control later on, and this continued to be something where the Catholic Church, if it wasn't corrupt, it isn't corrupt now, it was very corrupt back then. And let me make it clear, I'm not talking bad about belief systems or belief in God or a religion of your own, but I have severe reservations about the church. And the church has, the Vatican alone probably has suppressed more knowledge than any other institution through history. And I am sure that in the Vatican archives, they have plenty of information that people would be interested to hear. But because they obscure things, because governments have hidden things, because secret societies have existed, it leads people to believe that there's some great, vast human history that's being hidden from us. Now, I was a major fanatic of Ancient Aliens when it first came around, first came on. Some of these things I'd heard about, read about, Eric von Daniken, other books, but I hadn't really seen it in that, like, oh wow, okay, these mountaintops are cut off. Well, wow, maybe they are landing strips. But then you start thinking about it more, and you're like, well, why would they do it? Why would they land a ship there? Then you'd see, they talk about the Nazca lines in Peru and say, maybe these were to, show the aliens where to land. I'm like, it's the middle of the desert, and they're not even built that great. Like, the conclusions people leap to because they want answers can be extremely frustrating. You've got this guy, Georgios Tsoukalos, the wild-haired guy who is on Ancient Aliens. He became a celebrity, and now he's basically one of the greatest memes, It's just a picture of him, and aliens did it. But look, something that's fascinated me has always been, just like most of you, how the hell did they build the pyramids, and why? I've analyzed the stones, the size and the weight of the stones, the way that it's constructed, or at least we believe it's constructed, the way the rocks fit together, the perfection of it, how it has actually 8 sides, how it's perfectly faced to the directions, how the proportions are mathematically perfect, and it used to have a perfect cover of limestone that was totally smooth. You can imagine these things at one time in ancient history, in all their marvel, probably painted up with cities decorated all around them, and maybe the Nile even, could have flowed over there at one time. I mean, the climate changes quickly. We don't realize this, but, in these 12 and 24,000 year cycles, but also these smaller cycles, 6,000 and 3,000, we're living right now in just the very end of an ice age that ended like 10,000, 12,000 years ago. We have flourished on this planet. Many, many, many humans have been created. And when we look back, it's very hard for us to see what happened, not just even a few hundred years ago, but a few thousand or even 10,000 years ago. Could there have been an advanced civilization that existed that was flooded out at the end of the Ice Age? One of the leading theories a lot of people believe is the Younger Dryas event, which happened at the end of the Ice Age, in which there was a very rapid warming, and some believe that there was an impact event. It could have been a comet or a meteor, or several comets, maybe in Greenland or in the Atlantic, which caused the polar ice caps to melt quickly and also caused major tidal waves and flooding around the world, which could explain the flood myth. See, when I was young, I always thought Noah's Ark was just some other story. But the more I read other ancient stories that corroborated that there was some major flood event, I got curious about it. They're in China, South America, everywhere. So I started asking myself, okay, if this endured for so long, then there must be something to it. And here's where it gets interesting. There probably is. And there may have been an ancient civilization, perhaps Atlantis. Maybe there was an island that people really did live on that was submerged. Before, at the end of the last ice age, most people don't think about the ocean factor. Like, well, where were the civilizations? The oceans actually were like miles farther out than they are. There was like miles more land. And since 90% of the world usually lives on the coastline, you can imagine when that rapid, flooding event happened, it took out every civilization. So now we're starting to find ruins off the coasts, and Bimini Road, I think it's called. Bimini Road. There's like several different little discoveries that we make, which people say it's Atlantis, and they get very excited about it. But here's where I'm coming from. All these things are interesting, fascinating, but often there are clear answers that we just can't comprehend. One of them, for example, with the pyramids. I've watched some of these shows, like Uncharted X is one, and there's several others. Brian Forrester has a channel, and many of these things I even fell into. Just like the Electric Universe, the Thunderbolts project. They have these great ideas about how things came to be, whether it's how the universe came to be or how humans created things, and it's easy to believe because they're believable and they actually believe what they're saying. But then they start looking at the tool marks, let's say, on the rocks. And one great one that always got me was the perfect holes, large holes all the way through a chunk of granite. And they would show you the little spirals on the inside. And then finally somebody would repeat it with just a tube, like a copper tube with grain on the end, right? If you have the right, I think it's corundum, if I'm not mistaken, which is found in certain sands, which if that sand is put in a hole and then you spin something in there, maybe could be anything, could just be a piece of bamboo. But if it's done properly and patiently, you can drill through an entire piece of granite with just a pole and sand. It's been shown to be done. You can saw a rock the same way with the string and sand or whatever they may have used. So I'm not going to go into the logistical issues of, holy shit, cutting, 100-ton stone blocks perfectly flat, or looking at Peru, or, I think it's Tiwanaku, where they have just the stone foundation walls for the buildings that used to be there have these rocks that are perfectly cut, but they're cut at weird angles, and they just all fit together. And you'll hear these stories of you couldn't even slip a paper between them. Well, they had mortar in them, they did, but not all of them. Some of these rocks are actually perfectly fitted. How and why are they weird shapes? There's some process that was lost to time that probably simplified cutting these stones and putting them together. That much we can agree on. But as far as making up ideas about who did it, whether they were an ancient civilization with high technology, and especially the aliens thing, which is just too much. But let's just say, for argument's sake, maybe in the last 10,000 years, there was a race of humans that finally died out. And they were just a little bit different than us. I'm fascinated with the evolution of humans over the past few million years. When I was a kid, I would read about Neanderthals, and I would say, wow, these other human-like, creatures that looked similar to us, that bred with us, and then eventually died out. We have many theories, that we competed for food, or that we killed them, or disease killed them out. Nobody will ever know. What we do know is that most of us have some Neanderthal DNA in us. Some of us up to 3 to 5%, I believe. And that tells us that we're not all just Homo sapien, we have Neanderthal DNA. Well, now we've found that we have these other ones called Denisovans, which they've known about it for a long time. But then you start learning that there's more and more and more. Pretty soon you see that there's like a dozen different humanoids that we only have bits and pieces of, but we know that they're not like us, but they existed all at the same time. So through a period of hundreds of thousands of years, we lived alongside other beings just like us. And it's not too far of a stretch to say, after the bottleneck, which was, I don't remember how many tens of thousands of years ago, but there was a point where there was a major disaster, and they say that there may have been as few as 8,000 humans left on Earth. That always fascinated me, because they say that all of us are descendants from that small group that survived. They may have been scattered around, but perhaps at the time there was a more dominant civilization. Perhaps a civilization that had learned to, create technology that we wouldn't understand based on the things around them. Would those things survive? And I always think, well, why haven't we found any high technology, any devices, any tools? And then you look at the condition of even a building from 100 years ago. It's like, wow, things really fall apart fast. Metal rusts, and we've only barely scratched the surface. I mean, there are so many places on this planet, but even then, over like 1 billion years, all the rock turns over on this planet. I mean, there are very few places that still look like they did 1 billion years ago. So you start asking questions. Could humans have an ancient, similar, maybe not even an ancestor, but a totally different being that did rule on this planet 1 million years ago? What about 1 billion years ago? How would we know unless we found something? And that's where it gets into people making bold claims, wild claims, and also the gatekeepers who don't want to hear anything. Because if I'm going to talk about the people making crazy claims, I should also talk about the ones who are making legitimate claims, but have these institutions that want to tell them what's right and what's wrong. In other words, it's always been this way. This is how it is, and let's not change anything. And it's the gatekeepers in science are so controlling about information. They're not the kind of people who want to share data and inform people for the sake of humanity doing better. They're the people who want to profit or have their name on something. So if 100 people have written a paper based on the studies of one guy, and somebody wants to disprove his theory, they're going to have a hard time doing it. Take Einstein, for example. All the work that's been done off of his equations. Sometimes people will say, well, this equation doesn't work. Even if Einstein said this work is incomplete, people don't want to believe it because they put too much time into it already, and it might make them look bad. Think about string theory. When I first heard of string theory back in the 90s, it was exciting. It's like, wow, this is a cool theory. Watch the science shows and all the, back when Discovery did Discovery stuff. And I was like, wow, this is an interesting theory. So, 30 years later, they're still working on it. And many of these, other physics people are just saying, hey, dude, this is a waste of time. String theory is bullshit. But there's so much vested information in it. There's so much time and lives put into this that they don't want to admit that they may have been wrong. Yeah, maybe it is right, but I'm interested in too many different things, so I am definitely not an expert in any one. But when it comes to ancient history, I have to laugh at the ones who don't want to change and revise their view on history of humans, of the planet, the kind of people who, for example, wouldn't even entertain a flood myth because it's somehow tied to the Bible, for example. I mean, that would be a common one in science. Oh, the Bible says there was a flood, so everybody's looking for Noah's Ark on a mountainside. I mean, there are a lot of hoaxes and a lot of BS. You're not going to find Noah's Ark just hanging out somewhere because, in my belief, Noah's Ark was a metaphor. It was always a metaphor. It's an allegory. And just like a majority of the stories in the Bible, if they weren't telling of current events, they're allegories, archetypes, trying to understand ourselves better. At least that's how I see it. And that's not to disparage anybody who believes in it literally, although if you take the Bible literally, verbatim, you should read Latin first if you're going to go that far. But I think that there are stories we can take from all the ancient texts and beliefs, and some of those talk about flood myths. They talk about ancient technology, things in the sky, even in the Bible, talking about, wheels in the sky and angels, and you start to say, instead of discounting all of this completely, what would an ancient person think if this happened? Punishment from the gods, volcanoes that took out entire civilizations, Krakatoa, even once before that were even bigger. I think there was, I can't remember, Elna or something, but it's gone now. It's just a hole in the ocean, but at the time it was the biggest explosion in history. So if you were even within 100 miles, you'd be deafened and blown off your rocker. We're living in this window where civilization is allowed to flourish for a little while, and all it would take is one of these events, a major devastating event that perhaps in 2 million years people would never even believe we existed. I think it's hard for people to imagine that today, but all concrete crumbles and all rebar will rust. Not to leave on a negative note, but we're doing all right. We're using the resources we have and trying to learn the things we can about the past. And I don't know. I don't really believe or disbelieve anything when it comes to ancient history because I know we just don't know. And you have to be aware of knowing what you don't know, and you don't know what you don't know until you know it. And you know you didn't know it. And I'm okay with not knowing. I definitely won't let my hubris on topics get, the better of me. Sometimes people want assuredness on a topic, but Some things we just don't have that on. And it's more fun to wonder anyway. Much love, and I will talk to you all in the far future, a couple million years from now. Be well. Ooh. Sunset.